Om Ajnanatimirandasya Jnananjanishalaakaya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Nama Om Vishnupadaya Krishna Presthaya Bhutale Srimate Bhakti Vedanta Swamin Niti Namine. Namaste Saraswate Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschatya Deshatarine. Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shrivasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda. Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya Narayanam Namaskritya Naram Chaiva Narottamam Devim Saraswatim Vyasam Tato Jayam Mudirayet. In this session, we will be discussing from the 9th verse of the 7th chapter of the first canto of Srimad Bhagavatam. Shaunaka Vacha. Now, after Stoka Goswami said that Vyasadeva taught the Srimad Bhagavatam to his own son, immediately Shaunaka interrupts Stoka Goswami and asks a very, very important question. Kindly hear this question very attentively. Shaunaka Vacha Savai Nivritti Nirataha Sarvatro Pekshako Munihi Kasya va Brihatim Etam Atma-ramas Samabhyasat. The meaning is, Sri Shaunaka asked Stoka Goswami. Sri Shukadeva Goswami was already on the path of self-realization, and thus he was pleased with his own self, Atma-rama. Why did he take the trouble to undergo the study of such a vast literature? Bhagavatam is no small literature, 18,000 verses. Why did he undergo the trouble when he was already on the path of self-realization? So in the purport, Srila Prabhupada explains, for the people in general, the highest perfection of life is to cease from material activities and be fixed on the path of self-realization. Cease from material activities means these material activities are activities which are aimed at sense gratification. Sense gratification means the senses are always demanding some pleasure, some pleasing object of the senses. For the eyes it is beautiful form, for the ears it is some melodious music or some praise, for the tongue it is some palatable food, like that. The senses are demanding, and generally people simply are engaged in satisfying the demands of the senses. But somebody who understands that human life, there is an opportunity for perfecting ourselves by giving up this business of simply satisfying the senses and instead engage in activities of self-realization, then they want to stop all these sense gratification business and become engaged in self-realization. So, those who take pleasure in sense enjoyment or those who are fixed in material bodily welfare work are called Karmis. This is a technical term, please understand this. Karmi means one who is simply interested in material sense enjoyment, and they are simply tending to the needs of the body. They want to maintain the body in a healthy condition, keep it clean, keep it in a healthy condition, simply because that enables them to engage in sense pleasures. Now, out of thousands and millions of such karmis, who are many in this material world, some rare person may become an Atma-rama by self-realization. Self-realization is not easy work, but some rare person undertakes this self-realization and becomes successful in experiencing pleasure within, pleasure of the soul, pleasure of the self. Atma means self and arama means to take pleasure. Everyone is searching after the highest pleasure, but the standard of pleasure of one may be different from the standard of another. Of course, everybody wants pleasure, but their standard may not be the same. Therefore, the standard of pleasure enjoyed by the Karmis, the materialistic persons, is different from that of the Atma-ramas, the transcendentalists. The Atma-ramas are completely indifferent to material enjoyment in every respect. Why is Srila Prabhupada mentioning this? Because he is trying to explain what was the need for Shukadev Goswami to undertake study of this vast literature when he was already self-satisfied. What is the impetus? So, Srila Prabhupada says, Atma-ramas are indifferent to material enjoyment. They are not interested in material enjoyment. Srila Shukadev Goswami had already attained that stage. What stage? The stage of Atma-rama, taking pleasure in the self or the soul. And still he was attracted to undergo the trouble of studying the great Bhagavatam literature. So, there is an important conclusion here from this statement. This means that Srimad Bhagavatam is a postgraduate study even for the Atma-ramas who have surpassed all the studies of Vedic knowledge. Atma-ramas are not interested in any material stuff. So, why would they study Bhagavatam? Because Bhagavatam has got nothing to do with material sense enjoyment. It's completely transcendental. And not only that it is transcendental, it is not merely a transcendental literature which will award liberation. Those who are already liberated, again they won't take interest in some literature which describes how you can get liberation. That is the Vedanta philosophy. Vedanta philosophy is meant for people who want to get out of material bondage and put an end to the repetition of birth and death, and thereby put an end to all material miseries by becoming liberated by following the process of self-realization as described in the Vedanta philosophy or Vedanta literature. But Shukadev Goswami is already liberated. So, Shukadev Goswami will be neither interested in material sense enjoyment, nor will he be interested in that literature which describes how to get liberation. Both these kinds of literature are not meant for persons like Shukadev Goswami. So, therefore, somebody who is already liberated, not interested in, certainly not interested in any material enjoyment or material sense pleasures, and certainly not also interested in literature which teaches how you can get liberation, then what kind of literature will such a person study? That is described here as Srimad Bhagavatam. That's why Srila Prabhupada uses the term Srimad Bhagavatam is a postgraduate study even for the Atma-ramas, even for self-satisfied persons, spiritually satisfied persons. Bhagavatam offers something more. So, Bhagavatam contains a transcendental happiness which is of a different variety than the happiness of liberation. So, this is explained in the Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu. Generally, people know two kinds of happiness, material happiness and spiritual happiness. You know what does Nectar of Devotion or Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu say? It says that there are three kinds of happiness. Material happiness and spiritual happiness are two kinds of happiness which is there in other scriptures. But the confidential bhakti literature say there is a third kind of happiness called devotional happiness. This is a new term you might be hearing. What is that? Devotional happiness. Material happiness, spiritual happiness, devotional happiness. What is material happiness? Material happiness is the ordinary experience of sense pleasures. That's all. Gross or subtle. All of us have enough experience of this material happiness. What is spiritual happiness? That is the pleasure of the liberation from material bondage. Realizing I am spirit soul, I am not this body, and as spirit soul I am constitutionally Satchidananda. I am eternal, I am full of consciousness, and I am also entitled to the natural pleasure of the spirit or spiritual happiness, which is natural. So by nature we are actually spiritually happy. That's our nature, original nature. So this happiness, spiritual happiness, is far greater than any material happiness. In fact, there is no comparison. There is no comparison. But beyond spiritual happiness, this devotional happiness is much more than spiritual happiness. What is the comparison? Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu says that if you were to be able to get an ocean of spiritual happiness, then that ocean of spiritual happiness cannot equal even one drop of devotional happiness. This is a comparison in the Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu. So devotional happiness is the happiness that is the happiness derived by devotional service to Krishna, when Krishna reciprocates the devotee's service, devotional service. So that is billions and trillions of times more than any spiritual happiness also. So that happiness is what is there in the Bhagavatam, that devotional happiness. And there are so many examples given in the Bhagavatam, how different great devotees, pure devotees, they experience this bliss of devotional happiness. And such pure devotees who experience devotional happiness, they deride even the conception of liberation. One great devotee, Bilvamangal Thakur, he says, ever since I am engaged in devotional service and I am experiencing devotional happiness, I don't care for liberation, but liberation comes and waits as my maidservant. How can I serve you? So this is the position of a pure devotee, that a pure devotee is uninterested in liberation. Certainly a pure devotee is never interested in any material happiness. A pure devotee is not even interested in any kind of liberation. There are 5 kinds of liberation. But a pure devotee is not interested in any of the kinds of liberation. So pure devotee is simply interested in serving Krishna, because that is the source of unlimited transcendental bliss called devotional happiness. So Bhagavatam is filled with that. Simply by sitting and hearing the Srimad Bhagavatam from the proper source, one has access to this devotional happiness. We get a glimpse of that when we begin Sankirtana. In Sankirtana, there is some kind of experience of happiness which one has never experienced before, and that is very unique. But that is only a brief glimpse we get in the beginning of our Krishna consciousness. We have to cleanse our heart and become fixed up in devotional service to be able to experience real devotional happiness. I'll stop here. Thank you very much. Hare Krishna.